In a quiet neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida, where children still played freely in the streets and parents' biggest worry was having dinner ready on time, the community believed they lived in a bubble of safety. But on November 3rd, 1998, that bubble was shattered by a violence so intimate and disturbing it would leave permanent scars. This is the story of Madison "Maddie" Clifton, an 8-year-old girl with blonde hair and bright eyes, whose life was brutally cut short by the very neighbor who called her a friend. And what is most shocking, her body remained hidden for 7 long days, right under everyone's nose, in a place no one would think to look. This is one of those cases that makes us question the nature of evil and how it can manifest even in the most ordinary settings. Prepare yourselves, for today we dive into the real crime files of the Maddie Clifton case. The life of little Maddie Clifton was, until that fateful day, marked by normality and joy. Born on June 17, 1991, she was the youngest daughter of Steve and Sheila Clifton and the little sister of Jessica. The family lived on a peaceful street, the kind where everyone knew each other and the children formed a small tribe, riding bikes on the sidewalks, knocking door to door to call friends out to play. Maddie was described as a vibrant, intelligent child, full of hobbies. She took piano lessons, loved outdoor activities, and had that free and curious spirit typical of childhood. Her parents, as was common at the time, allowed her and her sister to play in the street, under the watchful but calm eyes of the neighbors. It was a time before the national scares that would make parents lock their children indoors. November 3rd, 1998 was a common Tuesday. Ball in Florida wasn't harsh, and the late afternoon still invited play. Maddie left her house and, as usual, began canvassing the neighborhood to recruit companions for her adventures. That day, however, fate was less generous. Many of her friends couldn't come out, busy with chores or schoolwork. Undeterred, Maddie ended up finding a small group, and the chosen game involved golf balls. They rolled along the sidewalks and streets until inevitably they got lost in gardens or washed down drains. It was then that Maddie had an idea. She remembered having more balls at home. "I have some at my house. I can go get them," she told her friends. The Clifton residence was just 3 houses away. It was a short, familiar, absolutely safe journey in anyone's eyes. She ran there, went inside, and it was at this moment that her life tragically intersected with her sister Jessica's. The older sister, 11 years old at the time, was concentrated on her piano exercises. Maddie's interruption, likely noisy and distracting, broke her focus. Without malice, Jessica asked her sister to leave and go play somewhere else. "Get out of here, Maddie. Go play outside," were likely words spoken with the typical impatience of an older sister. Maddie then went out. She did not return to the group with the balls. Instead, it seems she decided to look for them elsewhere. What exactly happened in the following minutes is the heart of this dark mystery. The last person to see Maddie Clifton alive outside her family was her sister. Twilight began to fall, and around 5 o'clock in the evening, the Clifton family table was set for dinner. It was when Sheila and Steve realized their youngest daughter wasn't home. Worried, but not yet in panic, they asked Jessica to go look for her on her bike. Jessica pedaled around the block, her cries of "Maddie" echoing in the darkening neighborhood. She asked the children who were still outside, who confirmed Maddie had gone home to get the balls and had not returned. Jessica's heart must have started beating faster. She rode around and around, expanding the search radius, hoping to see her sister emerge from behind a tree or from a friend's house. Nothing. Little Madison Clifton had vanished. Upon returning home without her sister, the mood shifted from worry to despair. Steve Clifton didn't waste time and made the call no father wants to make. He reported Maddie as missing to the Jacksonville Police Department. It was the official beginning of a nightmare that had only just started. The first moments after a disappearance are crucial. The statistics are merciless. With every passing hour, the chances of finding a missing child alive decrease drastically. The police arrived quickly and initiated standard procedures. Neighbors were interviewed, one by one. The children who played with Maddie told the same consistent story. She went to get the golf balls and didn't come back. The Jacksonville community, like a wounded living organism, reacted with touching strength. By the next morning, the neighborhood was filled with volunteers. Search teams were formed. Posters with Maddie's angelic face were printed and plastered on poles, shop windows, and windshields. Search dogs combed the area, their snouts trying to catch a trace of the girl's scent. Men, women, and young people dedicated their days to searching woods, vacant lots, and alleys. The Clifton family, devastated, lived in a state of suspended agony, fueled by a thread of hope. The local press gave the case wide coverage, and Maddie's image became familiar to the entire city. Meanwhile, investigators began profiling possible suspects. Two names emerged. The first was a man who lived a few streets away with a history of sexual assault from decades past. However, there was no evidence linking him to Maddie, and his prior crimes did not involve children. The second was an older neighbor, around 45, who had the somewhat eccentric habit of watching the children play. Many considered him harmless, a man who felt young at heart. He even failed a polygraph test which raised eyebrows, but his alibi was solid and, without concrete evidence, police couldn't pursue him. As the days passed, 1, 2, 3, hope began to transform into a grim foreboding. The search for a living child slowly gave way to the terrible possibility of searching for a body. The FBI was called in to assist the investigation, a clear sign the situation was grave. For Steve and Sheila Clifton, the agony was indescribable. Their daughter was somewhere, alone, scared, or worse. What no one knew, what no one could even imagine, was that the answer to the mystery was just meters away from the Clifton house. In the house across the street lived the Phillips family. They were close neighbors, considered friends. The couple, Melissa and her husband, and their 14-year-old son Joshua, were actively participating in the search. Joshua, in particular, seemed deeply affected. He was seen printing posters, distributing flyers, appearing as a concerned and sympathetic young man. He was the picture of community involvement. No one suspected that behind that facade of an ordinary teenager hid a monstrous secret. 7 days passed. It was now November 10th, 1998. The search for Maddie Clifton no longer had the same momentum, replaced by a heavy discouragement and the painful preparation for devastating news. In the Phillips house, routine tried to impose itself. Melissa Phillips was home alone, taking advantage of her husband's absence at work and her son Joshua's at school to do a thorough cleaning. She decided to tackle her son's teenage room. Joshua had pet birds, and the cage, which he rarely cleaned, emitted a strong odor. Melissa cleaned the cage, aired out the room, but noticed a different, much more fetid and nauseating smell persisting. It was an organic smell of decomposition. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on her son's bed. Joshua used a waterbed, and she noticed it was leaking. A puddle of liquid was forming on the floor. The smell must be coming from the moldy water, she thought. Determined to solve the problem, Melissa pulled back the sheets. It was then she saw that Joshua himself had tried to fix a tear in the vinyl of the mattress. He had used adhesive tape, the silver sturdy kind, to seal the hole. And stuck in the tape was a sock. Intrigued, she tried to pull the sock, but it seemed stuck on something inside. A chill ran down her spine. With hands that perhaps already trembled with a horrible premonition, she began to remove the tape. Upon opening the slit in the waterbed and looking inside, Melissa Phillips's world collapsed. There, wrapped in the dark, stagnant water, was the swollen, pale body of Madison Clifton. The girl the entire city was searching for had been there the whole time, in the neighbor's room, just steps from her own home. The despair was instant. Melissa, in shock, tried to call her husband, but it went to voicemail. Unable to stay in the same house as that secret, she ran into the street, where she knew the police were still at the Clifton house. Through tears and shouts, she told them of the horrible discovery. The police, disbelieving at first, followed her back and confirmed the most terrifying truth. At that very moment, Steve and Sheila Clifton were in their living room, awaiting a press conference about their daughter's disappearance, when they learned she had been found, dead, in the house across the street. The police didn't waste a second. Joshua Phillips's room was transformed into a crime scene. Maddie's body was retrieved from its liquid tomb, and the autopsy would reveal the extent of the brutality. She had been beaten with a baseball bat, stabbed multiple times, and initially suffocated. The case, which was a disappearance, had become an extremely violent homicide. Meanwhile, agents went to Joshua's school and arrested him. His classmates and teachers were shocked. He didn't fit the stereotype of a killer, but the evidence in his room was irrefutable. Besides the body, police found a bloody baseball bat and a knife hidden, bloodstains on the ceiling showing the force of the blows, and sneakers with blood spatter in the closet. More sinister still, one of the missing posters of Maddie was hanging on his bedroom wall, staring at him every night as he slept with her body under his mattress. Under interrogation, Joshua Phillips gave his version of events, a narrative that investigators and later the court would find full of holes and inconsistencies. He claimed he was playing baseball alone in his backyard when Maddie appeared and asked to play. Reluctant, because his father didn't allow visitors in the absence of adults, he allegedly agreed. He said he then accidentally hit her in the face with a baseball. Maddie, according to him, started screaming and crying. Afraid of his father's reaction, he dragged her inside to his room, where he beat her with the bat to silence her. Unconscious, he put her inside the waterbed. Hours later, realizing she was still alive, and moaning, he took her out and stabbed her before putting her back in the mattress. However, this story didn't hold up. Maddie's sister, Jessica, would later reveal that she and Maddie had been expressly forbidden by their parents from interacting with Joshua after he made a joke of a disturbing sexual nature. Maddie, an obedient girl, would hardly disobey that order. The autopsy found no injury consistent with a baseball to the face. Furthermore, the Phillips backyard was small and dominated by a pool, making a game of baseball unlikely. The pattern of Maddie's clothing inside the mattress also didn't match the story of them coming off accidentally. The most widely accepted theory, built from the evidence, is much darker. Investigators believe Joshua, who was discovered watching violent pornography minutes before and after the crime, lured Maddie into his house, possibly under the pretext of giving her the golf balls. Inside in his room, he tried to assault her sexually. When Maddie, frightened, started to scream, he suffocated her to silence her. Realizing she could report him, and seized by panic and brutal fury, he proceeded to beat and stab her. The fact that he actively participated in the search, with the body still in the room, demonstrates a level of coldness and deceit that is difficult to comprehend. Joshua Phillips's trial began on July 6, 1999. Because it was a crime of extreme brutality, and because he had multiple chances to stop or seek help, he was tried as an adult. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder. On August 26th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years later, in 2012, a U.S. Supreme Court decision questioned mandatory life sentences for juveniles. This opened a loophole for a possible new trial for Joshua. The Clifton family, especially Jessica, lived through years of anguish at the possibility of her tormentor walking free again. However, in 2017, a judge re-evaluated the case and upheld the original sentence. Joshua Phillips will remain behind bars for the rest of his life. The case of Madison Maddie Clifton is more than the story of a murder. It is a study of how evil can hide behind the most common facade. It is a tragic reminder that violence doesn't always come from strangers in dark places, but can emerge from the backyard next door. The life of a child full of light was violently extinguished, and a family was condemned to eternal pain. The Jacksonville community would never be the same. The innocence of that neighborhood, like that of little Maddie, was forever lost inside that waterbed. And with this disturbing case, we conclude another real crime file. If this content was in any way relevant to you, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss our next investigations. Share your thoughts in the comments, but always with respect for the victims and their families. Until next time, and stay alert.